Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
Today, we'd like to welcome Jack Soslow from Andreessen Horowitz, based in San Francisco. Welcome, Jack.
Hey, Laura, Will, good to see you guys.
So after college, you started as a data scientist at Oculus. It would be great if you could touch on your role and what pushed you into venture capital, specifically a16z.
I joined Oculus right after college, data scientist. I was at Wharton at Penn, and Wharton is like a business school of which you learn no technical skills. So why did I end up at Oculus as a data scientist, which was a fairly technical role? The reason is because I was deeply, deeply fascinated by technology. And I wanted to figure out how to have as much leverage over technology and the future of technology as possible. For me, I found that tech was actually the best way to have as much impact on people, not only in our generation, but for generations to come. This is kind of what is the impact of Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, what have you? They're impacting billions of people for not only our generation, but years and years and generations to come. So with that in mind, it's not about funding, or working on mergers and acquisitions. It's actually how do you impact as many people as possible? So with that in mind, I was okay, I'm in Wharton, I'm doing finance, this doesn't seem like a very viable skill set for what I think might be impactful in the world. So I spent all of my free time learning how to code, learning about software engineering, learning about entrepreneurship, learning about product management, building apps, websites, anything that I felt would help me in my daily life and was also interesting to help me learn. In that time, I was at school. I was going from a finance degree to more of a statistics degree to more of an engineering entrepreneurship degree. I was the leader of our Wharton undergraduate data analytics club, and slowly but surely building up skill sets that would be important for a role in tech. By the time I graduated, I was pretty good at data science and analytics, and I had the opportunity to choose where I wanted to go for a data science role. And I chose Oculus because I tried the Quest after graduation and immediately saw, extrapolated that this was the future of technology, future of computing interfaces. And it was so far ahead of everything else in the VR space, as well as such a huge advancement from previous generations of the technology that if you extrapolated the derivative further to Quest 2 to Quest 3 to Quest 4, it was very clear that this was going to be the future. So I wanted to be a part of that team because they had a lot of influence on technology at large. So I joined that team. The way I joined the team was by knocking down doors. They weren't recruiting at the time. I literally just sat at the desks during this 1 month trial period where you're learning about Facebook and you get to pick your teams. They weren't recruiting. I just sat at the Oculus desks until they gave me a project to work on, worked on the project, got the job. And they gave me the lowest level job on the team, worked my way up within the org, eventually learned more and more skills. Facebook was a super open culture. So I was able to learn all of the data science tips and tricks from all of the other people, not only within Oculus, but within Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, what have you. Started to build up my skill set in data science world, gained more and more responsibility within the organization, had my hand, nose, and fist into things outside of the job purview. And the reason for all of this is because I wanted to be good at tech. As I say, the objective function was having as much impact on tech as possible. So I kept learning more and more new things, try to get more and more responsibility. Anytime there was a problem with the tech or the company, I would have an opinion. I was the only person who would ask questions of leadership and poke and prod and try to make sure that we were doing the right things. And eventually, why did I leave Oculus? Well, I think that I was pushing and pushing and pushing to make it work. And I was facing more and more of a rapid moving stream coming in the opposite direction of bureaucracy and overhead and people trying to get in my way. And I wasn't learning as much anymore. So there was a point where it was okay, if I'm not learning as much anymore and I don't have as much impact on the product as I would like, then what can I do to have impact on technology at large? So I was in this liminal space that I was exploring starting a company. I had a bunch of ideas. I spent a lot of my free time on side projects because I'm curious and I wanted to build new skills. And it was in this period that a16z reached out. They were looking for more of a quantitative person on their consumer team. My roommate at the time knew someone on the consumer team, and they reached out to him asking him if he knew anyone that would be a good fit for this hypothetical role, to which I was referred in.
Love some networking.
Yeah, exactly. And then I spent a lot of my time in and around tech. So I listened to all the podcasts, read the blog posts, watched YouTube videos. And one of the podcasts that I loved the most was a16z's. And the reason why I loved a16z's podcast was because they were pro tech. It was pro tech in a sea of very anti-tech media. I was working at Facebook at the time, and there was just like the media was lambasting Facebook for what I thought was no good reason. Like, sure, they had their flaws, but at the end of the day, like Facebook was like a very strong net force for good in the world. As I say, impacting billions of people for generations and generations and generations to come. When A16Z had this staunch opinion that like, hey, tech is good, Facebook is good, we want to propagate technology throughout the world, it definitely struck like the religious missive values in my head. So it's definitely a meme that stuck, and I wanted to join that team. Why did I join? Well, because what ends up happening is that like A16Z has a lot of leverage over tech. What I'm finding is that like my voice actually holds weight. My opinions matter. I get to decide like which companies get funded and get to see all of the most interesting, cool new pieces of technology in the world. Even before this call, I was telling you about like a cool pitch I saw yesterday, and I saw like 2 more earlier today. I'm riffing with founders on like literally what the future looks like. It's a ton of fun. And even in my seat at like A16Z, I feel like I have more leverage over the AR VR ecosystem than I did at Oculus itself. And not only do I have more leverage in AR VR, I have more leverage over things like AI, games infrastructure, games in general. And it's been really, really fulfilling in that respect. Because if like my goal is to have impact, and then like the seat at A16Z is the place to be. So that was a transition. So it all starts back to like, how do I have as much impact over technology at large? And that's why I joined Oculus and then A16Z after that.
No, we appreciate it. And it sounds like just the technical skills and what you're able to build in your free time, I'm sure made you a really attractive candidate to A16Z.
I think that helps for sure. I think it shows initiative, frankly. Like even what you guys are doing with this podcast shows initiative. You want it, and you're like willing to work on yourselves and like build up your own like resume, carve your own path sort of thing. I think that it's the demeanor or disposition that is like predictive of success in that respect.
Now's a good time to kind of transition to the fund itself, the games fund. We read online that Fund 1 was a $600 million fund. So can you touch on the impetus for starting the games fund?
Yeah. So the games fund was originally a spin out of the consumer fund. I said like I originally joined as an analyst on the consumer team. What the consumer team was noticing was a few things. First, that like each progressive half, we would do these like all hands meetings, and like slowly but surely games was a growing and growing percentage of all the deals done on the consumer team. And then initially, like what were the theses that were driving these games investments? Well, the theses that were driving these games investments were that games were the next social networks. Essentially, if you asked any 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, any kid, Gen Alpha, what have you, where they're spending time with their friends, it's like not on TikTok, Instagram, or Snapchat. It's like the vast majority of their time is on Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft. If we wanted to bet on the future of social networks as a consumer team, then the future of social networks was games. Additionally, we saw another trend. Another trend was that the world was moving from 2D to 3D. Like more and more experiences online, more and more experiences in general were becoming 3D experiences. And as a part of this 3D revolution, there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to be built to enable it. And then the final thing that we were noticing was this transition from physical to digital identity. People spent more and more time focusing on how they were perceived online than they were in real life. People were identifying as their usernames. People were building anonymous profiles. People were building avatars of themselves. Kids these days, if they go on Roblox, or like in game, like the vast majority of their friends, actually, like the people they hang out with, they've actually never even met in real life. This was in a COVID generation where like, I think it was like 75% of kids or something like that was only interacting with their friends online and wasn't interacting with them in person. So like this digital identity is becoming more and more pervasive. So with that in mind, all of these trends, like more games deals, future of social networks, 2D to 3D, and then digital identity kind of led to the founding of the Games Fund. And then beyond that, A16Z has this ethos when we build funds. When we invest in companies, we want to have vertical specific expertise. Essentially, what we were finding is that games was such a specific niche and needed such specific skills in order to be good and helpful to the companies that we invest in, that we needed to build out our own practice and build out those skill sets internally. Things like, what is a producer in games, or a game designer, or a technical 3D artist? These are specific jobs just for games itself that we needed to have like recruiters for who knew the networks. Or like, how do you design an economy? Like we need to have an economy designer internally. How do you deal with go-to-market? Like, how do you deal with influencers? So Like, how do you deal with Twitch? Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that like are very specific to games that require games expertise. So if we wanted to best serve the founders that we invested in, we needed to build out our own practice. So we saw the trends from an investing perspective. We knew that we needed to build out like specific expertise. And that's kind of like what led to the Games Fund at large.
Got it. No, that's really helpful. And I think if you could just ground the group, what stages you invest in, and also like how do you define gaming? I mean, it's such a broad term. What are you looking at?
Our sweet spot is probably anything from like 3 to like a $20 million deal. Like I would, and the vast majority of our deals are gonna be like $5 to $10 million, but like anything within that range is stuff that we'll do. And then additionally, we'll expand sometimes to do deals with like our growth fund. So a great example of this is the deal we did in Roblox pre-IPO, one of the best growth investments in a16z's history. Like games help partner on that, run the diligence, et cetera. And then on like below that $3 million end for like pre-seeds, we're working on programs like Speed Run, which is coming out now, and keep your eyes out for if you're a games founder. That helps us kind of build out capabilities for these more early stage founders. The other question you had there was like what stages we invest, and then how do you define gaming at large? Well, gaming at large, it's very nebulous. You could talk about it just like gaming studios, like almost investing only in Hollywood productions, or games infrastructure, things that sell into game studios, or like games derivatives. The way that we define gaming is like gaming, like all of those things, like gaming studios, games infrastructure, games derivatives, and then gamified experiences. And then as a part of gamified experiences, we invest in like frontier technologies. When I talk about frontier technologies, I mean about like AR, VR at large. Why frontier tech for the firm or like Games Fund? Because games tends to be one of the first applications atop of frontier technologies. So we invest in infrastructure there. We bet on a bunch of like crypto infrastructure. We're betting on like AR, VR infrastructure, and even AR, VR applications that are like Prism's VR is gamified ed tech using VR as like the medium to communicate math and science materials in K through 12. And then on the games infrastructure side, this includes anything from things like Ready Player Me, which is like avatars as a service for the metaverse, or like Snapster, which is a backend, games backend, essentially like consider it like Amazon, AWS, and a whole bunch of other analytic services and building blocks that help enable you to make the game that you want to build in a flexible way. And then games derivatives, what does that mean? Those are going to be things that like essentially derivative of the gaming ecosystem. What we mean by that is things like Twitter or Twitch, Discord, or maybe even things like sports betting communities, where it's like the game is like the sport, or like League of Legends, but like you build a community around it or communication tools around it for the community of the game. Gaming has a pretty wide aperture. We're also starting to see like just generally like enterprise SaaS becomes gamified, or consumer apps become gamified. In that respect, like the games expertise is useful for those founders who are trying to build those applications. So the gaming aperture is pretty wide. It's not just studios. We invest in a whole bunch of different things, including frontier tech.
Great. I think it's a great transition into focusing on a little bit on gaming studios just for a moment here. I think they're fairly unique in terms of what qualities you typically look for to evaluate a potential investment. So I guess would love to hear it just initially. What do you look for in a potential gaming studio investment, and how do you think about concentration in a single title?
It's a good question. So when we're investing in game studios, we're often investing in just like a team and an idea. This is different, and like our investing structure differs slightly than say like a traditional games publisher. So what is a games publisher? A games publisher is something like Sony, Xbox, Epic, what have you, where they are going in and they are giving the company money to go and build their game and then get like essentially bespoke distribution rights on the game. So I will pay you $10 million to make your game, and then we get it exclusive for 1 year on Xbox. That's traditionally how games are funded. The VC model is like we invest in like team and idea and the studio at large. So not just this game, but like the games to come, and we're investing in you. Generally, we are investing on like the initial game because that's where a lot of the value accrues in a studio. A lot of the major studios, the billion-dollar studios that exist, have like one tentpole title. Oftentimes, we are investing in like a game plus person or plus team. So when it comes to concentration, that's something that we're okay with. But with that in mind, the important thing that goes into game studio investing are like a few considerations. Like one, have you built a game in the past? If so, like what is the caliber of the games that you've built? Do you know what you're doing? And can you actually ship this title? Because shipping games is not easy. Two, where are you shipping for? What is your go-to-market strategy? Is this a free-to-play game? Is it a multiplayer game? How are you positioning yourselves? What is the genre you're going after? How are you figuring out how to like capture the zeitgeist at your launch? Those sorts of things. For us, like what we're looking for in a studio is generally free-to-play multiplayer games. And the reason it kind of ties back to the future of social networks. Kids don't have discretionary income and can't pay $60 for a game. And like, if you want to build a social network, you probably want to have as many people on it as possible. And then you monetize a long tail on retention. And then there's the occasional studio that we'll invest in that's actually more of like a publisher. I talked about publishers before, but like publishers are essentially people that have multiple game studios and then have like some distribution advantage. So in the case, we invested in one company called Carry First. Carry First is trying to be like the Tencent or Garena of Africa. They have like a whole portfolio of different games. For Carry First, like, how do we evaluate this? Well, one, we look at the market. Is this a market we want to invest in? African games, like, yes. We think that there's going to be a huge boon in growth in this area. Two, it's like, okay, how is the portfolio of games doing? In this case, they're publishing like casual mobile games primarily right now. And these games tend to have like low retention. So what we want to look for is your ability to both increase the games that you've acquired to improve them, and then additionally either to monetize them or to continually acquire them over time. So the growth motion is less about like go to market on one game, but how do you increase your portfolio of games? This also applies like pretty directly to things like Roblox games. So we invested in this another publisher called Voldex. Roblox games have really bad retention, and oftentimes they're hits. But one of the big motions that we look for when investing in Roblox or like in Voldex was their ability to expand their portfolio, improve the games that they acquire, and then make sure that they have like staying power over time. I won't go into like the secrets that like make Voldex successful in that respect, but like, yeah, that's generally what we're looking for. Yeah.
Great. And I guess maybe to double click on an individual title, I think a great quote that I heard recently was, I think it was the Supercell founder who mentioned the most successful games create a community that encourage people to come back and talk about things beyond the actual game. So I think the most classic example of this is logging on to Fortnite and having you and your friends talk about homework or something beyond the game. And as you said, it creates a sense of community. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear kind of qualitatively and quantitatively, what do you look for in successful individual title?
Oftentimes when we're investing in studios, in games, we don't see them post-launch. But there is one niche area where we do, which is in VR. So like when we're looking at a VR game, what are we looking for in particular? Our VR thesis is essentially this: recess in VR. And as you say, the people in the game aren't playing with the game itself. They are playing with each other more so. It's about the nascent social behavior around the game itself. Like we invested in Gym Class VR. It's essentially basketball in VR. If you go into one of these gyms, what you'll find are just a bunch of kids who are like dancing around and playing dodgeball. The game is about basketball, but like they're doing other stuff. If you go into a game like Gorilla Tag, the kids are like breakdancing. Like, for example, I got into a game of Gorilla Tag, and essentially it's infection in VR. So like once you're tagged, it's your job to tag anybody who hasn't been tagged yet. I got in, I haven't been tagged. I'm surrounded by a bunch of kids who have all been tagged and they're looking to tag me, but they surround me, so I have no way out. They go up to me and they look at my username, it's Labrolius. They say, Labrolius, like, if you don't do a cool dance move right now, we are going to tag you. So it's like these sorts of things where it's like a nascent social behavior beyond the game itself that we look for, especially in VR. And then like when it comes down to like the metrics at the end of the day, this is the qualitative stuff that we look for in terms of investing in like working titles. More so than that, it's like quantitative, frankly. We're looking at growth and retention and return on ad spend as like the big indicators of whether or not a game is working. So it's like, are you growing? Is this like capturing a big user audience and getting bigger over time? Is it retaining the users that are playing? Are they coming back over and over again? In particular, we're looking at retention flatness. Even if it's like 3% of users that are coming back on day 30, if the same 3% of users are coming back on like day 365, then it's pretty indicative that it's really has strong product market fit with that group. The last thing we look for is like monetization. Can you actually monetize them in some respect? And frankly, that's like the least important. But yeah, that's kind of what we look for when evaluating games.
Great. And I guess maybe for the listeners' benefit, it would be great if you could just walk through the differences between augmented reality and virtual reality, and then maybe talk about what do you see as the future use cases for both and how do they differ?
A really good analogy for understanding the differences between these two is the future of laptops will be VR, and then the future of phones is AR. So a lot of the use cases that require like hyper presence, hyper focus, deep engagement will be better suited for VR versus like mobile use cases, things that you have to do on the go, more casual things, texting, looking up information, etc., are better suited for AR. What is VR? Specifically virtual reality. It's essentially a reconstruction of 3D space in front of your eyes, just digitally. So you can't see anything else around you, but by showing you a different image in your right and left eye, we can reconstruct a image in your brain of like what is going on in 3D. Things that are great in VR, there's VR for work. Say, for example, if you want to be engaged in deep focused work, you want to drown out everything around you. And because VR is like strapped in front of your eyes, you can't see anything else, it demands deep focus. So VR for deep work is great. VR for social interaction. Generally, any use case where you feel uncomfortable whipping out your phone at like you is better suited for VR than AR. Education, meetings, like you guys probably like aren't looking at your phones right now. Meditation, fitness are really good use cases for VR. And then when it comes to AR, like some of the primary use cases right now are going to be things like quick information search. You have information in front of your eyes. Say, for example, you want to say like, what is this store? What is it rated? It will pick it up for you. Say, for example, you have something in the back of your brain. You want to query Google or ChatGPT for information, you get it quickly. Say, for example, you want information interwoven atop of reality. That's a really good use case for AR. Say, for example, mapping you to a certain location. Another good use case for AR is like generally any sign that exists in the world today is information atop of reality. You have reality, and then people are trying to put up street signs to like tell you more information about it. They put up an advertisement on like the back of a bus stop. Like that is more information atop of reality. Generally, I think the world can be de-signed. Like there shouldn't be signs in the world. Like this should all live digitally, like in some map. And then like your AR glasses should like propagate it based off of like what is important to you or what is relevant to you, and it's context dependent. And because we have AI models that can more or less understand context now, it should be pretty good at like sending you the right information. Here's the real use case for AR, frankly, is people want to make AR skeuomorphic. They want to append information atop of reality rather than remove information. The real reason why people wear glasses today, and it's like, I think it's like 33% of people wear glasses or contacts or something, is because they want to improve their vision. Like vision is the most important sense that humans have. I think it's almost like 50% of your brain is dedicated towards like processing visual information. If you can make a better pair of glasses that augment your vision, say for example, give you the ability to zoom, give you beyond 20/20 vision, give you the ability to like see in the night, this alone would sell millions of AR glasses. The real vision for AR is what I call the vision. So I think that's like the killer use case. And then like for VR, it's like a whole bunch of use cases that exist currently.
That's great. I hope your glasses are able to do something nifty like that in the near future, if not today.
Yeah.
I was telling Jack the other week, I think I had maybe one of the first versions of VR goggles. They were a View 6 pair. I think I got them in 2013 or 2012. And it was essentially like a 15-inch flat screen 5 feet away from you. And it was just this very nascent idea of what VR would become, but it was pretty fascinating. It's a very, very interesting. Thanks for the context, Jack.
You know, back when I was a gamer, talking 15 years ago, I was playing Rock Band. I mean, FIFA was big, still big. And I guess you're not always product testing, but when you are product testing, how are you determining engagement levels and if this product will be sticky enough to, sustain in the industry?
Great question, honestly. Like if you've been playing games your entire life, you can pretty quickly determine if this game is going to be a hit or not. But how do you like measure that in some like repeatable format? Well, games are split into kind of three main components. There's the moment to moment. And what moment to moment is like the actual movement. Like what is the core mechanic of the game? Say like in Mario, it might be the jump. In say like VR, it might be like the locomotion. Like in Gorilla Tag, it's like moving around. In say like a shooting game, it might be like the actual like shooting of the gun, like the aiming down the sights and then like the recoil of the shot. Like that is the moment to moment. And then the core loop is the reward mechanism of the game. What are they trying to reinforce? And then there's like the metagame. The metagame is like what you do between games. Say like in 2K, it might be improving your My Player character. In Roblox, it might be like improving your avatar. In something like RuneScape, it might be like trading on the Grand Exchange. Those are more of like the metagame type components. When we're evaluating early playtest games, what we're trying to evaluate is like one, like objective taste, like is this a good game? But like we're trying to break it down into those components. So like how good is the moment to moment? How good is the core loop? How good does it compare to like all the other things that exist in the market? Like if we saw a Fortnite clone, it would be a good game. But like, do we see it being successful? Probably not, because something exists with a network effect. It's like a combination of taste with like a little bit of breaking down off of those like key vectors.
Something I was actually listening to earlier today kind of pointed me down this rabbit hole, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the impact of generative AI applications like a Midjourney on the creative workspace and for example, graphic designers at gaming studios. I recognize it's likely augmentative to their skills, but it does kind of change their day-to-day work, right? You're becoming more of an editor than a creator at heart. Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So we at a16z at large, and I do a lot of work with our AI strategy, think that AI is going to be the most important technological revolution potentially of our lifetimes. Like we think it's almost like internet level scale, like what AI is doing right now. Fortunately, like AI, like some of the first applications of these new generative AI models are in games. So, and why is this the case is because like games require a lot of content, of which these generative AI models can produce like production quality content in far fewer time and like much cheaper cost. It's a huge disruption. We're talking like over 100x disruption in terms of like creating high quality content over time. Games is one of the most content heavy applications. We're sitting in a great seat at the Games Fund for this revolution. What does this mean for games at large? Well, two things. On the infrastructure side of the house, which is like probably the core of your question, you can make a bigger, better game a little bit today, more in the future, because models are like good for certain use cases, but not all of them yet, but all of them will come. And it's like only a matter of when. It's like it can't do videos, but it will eventually, or 3D assets, but it will eventually. You can make a game, like say games in the past would cost $500 million. A game today of that scale, like a Red Dead Redemption 2, might cost you like $50 million, and then eventually like $5 million, and then eventually like 500K, and then eventually like $5. So it's like it's like the cost to create is a cost that approaches zero. It's a limit that approaches zero. So what does this mean for games? Like the derivative of that for games is that a lot more content will be made, and a lot more people who couldn't have made content before will be making content. But the core of your question is like, how does this impact the artistic process? What it does really is it enables a lot of people who wanted to be artists to be artists. And it changes the core skills needed to produce a good game from some of the like rote work around like editing like your 101 character pose to being able to compose a series of AI models who do what you want to do. So the real skill set becomes composition, taste, and leveraging these tool sets. A lot of these artists who are stuck in like work jobs can now tell stories, can now be able to create 10x more things than they would have been able to in the past. So it's less about editing. It's more about giving, I think like a lot of artists who want to be more like storytellers have a more fulfilling job at the end of the day. Now, the question is, do all artists want to be storytellers? Do all artists, or do like some artists just love the craft of creating the work? If they love the craft of creating the work, then like there's still a space for this. So say, for example, when the photograph first came out, a lot of, say, hyper-realistic artists felt like their job was being disrupted. What it meant was actually that the market desire for hyper-real paintings actually increased at the same time. So I think that what this tech is doing is tech is a tool, and you could see it in a negative light and say like, oh my God, like their jobs are being disrupted. But I think like both the storytellers are able to compose more with their art. They're able to like have a lot more leverage, and now are able to be like directors instead of like ICs. And then also for the people who actually love the enjoyment of like the craft, their market will actually increase. So it's good for both. Now, that's on the infrastructure side. Games are going to be made much more quicker with a much larger scale for much cheaper cost. Eventually the games will be better and will increase the upper bar of the content that you consume. On the other side of the house, like what generative AI does is it enables a whole new class of games that could have never been created before to now exist. And these include games, I think like the best example of this are like social engineering type games. Say games where you need to convince people of something. A great example of this is like you're trying to be elected the Pope, and you're in like the papal room, and you need to convince all of the people in the room that you should be like the Pope. Or say, for example, it's like you're a detective in a town trying to discover like the murder of a town, and you have to talk to each person who has like a different clue. Or like, say, for example, you're trying to escape a prison, and you need to work with all the other prisoners, like establish allies and like convince the guards that you're on the good side. These types of games never existed, but sound like a ton of fun. That's what generative AI can do. And then there's like a whole bunch of other like new genres that can come about, say like personalization genres where the content is generated at runtime, exactly catered to your preferences. Those I think are a little bit further out. There's a lot of goodness to come from this tech, both on the infra and on the application side that have never existed before.
Very interesting. Would love to take a step back from the entertainment use case of games. I think part of the thesis at a16z is that gaming goes beyond classic video games and entertainment. And for example, I've heard of medicinal use cases for gaming. So with that in mind, would love to hear, what do you think is interesting right now that goes beyond the pure entertainment use case with gaming?
So I think one of the core benefits of gaming, essentially gaming is optimized for, is understanding what captures your attention and what keeps you engaged over time. What are some of the use cases that benefit from like capturing your attention? Say, for example, ADHD treatments. Say, for example, making sure that you want to be fit. People who lose their attention span or don't want to like get into like a fitness class can have that experience gamified. The real thing that I'm most excited for, where attention is key and critical, is education. A lot of kids today, if you put them in front of a math textbook, are going to immediately churn. Frankly, they don't even want to read. They spend the vast majority of their time in 3D worlds interacting with their friends and learning math through like Minecraft and Redstone. The alternative is like a real game experience where the game understands how to capture your attention, gives you the reward mechanisms that make you feel like you're progressing, but at the same time are teaching you real skills that are important for the rest of your life. A great example of this is Prisms VR, which captures your attention through like a VR headset as well as gamified components. And through that medium is able to much more effectively communicate key math subjects like algebra. Kids who are taking like, say, math or like algebra with like Prisms VR are having like better outcomes at the end of like their year than they would have otherwise. So gaming is like when you think of like the core tech is like about like understanding what like keeps you attentive. So there are a lot of like derivative use cases that are good from that.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So now I'd like to pivot over to the women's side of gaming. So I was reading online that, the female gamer segment has really soared over the last decade. Specifically, female gamers represent 48% of the global mobile gaming market, with 21% of adult mobile gamers being women aged 36 plus. So I was wondering if, you could touch on where women are in the space, where the founders playing, and in addition, gamers are a diverse group. So how will the gaming industry catch up?
You're right. The average gamer is not what you'd expect. It's this like 36-year-old female who's like playing casual games or even games that you wouldn't even consider games in the past. If you ask them though, they wouldn't consider themselves a gamer. They are a gamer, but they don't consider themselves that. They're playing games like Wordle or Candy Crush, and it's used to pass free time usually. With that said, like the gaming audience, it's now becoming more in the Overton window for like females to take part in like hardcore games, MMOs, VR, other things like that, like more hardcore games. Females are definitely coming along for the ride, and we're seeing more and more female founders come into the game space. I'd say like when I first joined, we were seeing a much lower percentage than what we're seeing today. One of the best founders that I work with, and this is going to turn into like a shilling operation for Prisms VR, is Anurupa Ganguly from Prisms. She is such a beast. She is an indomitable spirit. Like there is nothing that will get in the way of her and achieving her mission. She is like flying around every day, talking to schools. She's like always online. Her team is all in San Francisco and they're grinding. She's like the most positive interpretation of like religious cult leader, but for good. She's incredible. We're seeing more and more people like her come into this space. These are the kinds of people that we love to back, the kinds of people that are so dedicated to like changing the world. And more often, we're seeing people like Anurupa come to the space. So it's been great working with her, and like more to come for sure.
So we like to end every episode with 2 questions. And the first question is, what motivates you to work hard?
No, I have two answers. One is crazy, and one is like, I'd say more applicable. The first more applicable one, I'll start there so like I don't seem that crazy. Like the first more applicable one is I've been given a certain certain constraints on my life. I have X amount of intelligence. I have X amount of energy. I have like this body that I can't really change. And given all of this, like I would not be happy if I don't feel fulfilled. I think a lot of different people have different like objectives over the course of their life. It could be like to achieve social status. It could be to achieve wealth. It could be to achieve like a really loving and strong family. For me, like the thing that drives me is this desire to be fulfilled. So how do you be fulfilled? You accomplish everything that you could possibly accomplish given the set of constraints that you have. So that's what motivates me to work hard. If I'm not working on myself and I'm not working towards like being the best version of myself, then I'm not going to end up being fulfilled. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I think like the timeline for like our lives and like the general human experience is far shorter than most people think. So like what drives me to work hard now is I seriously think that like the human experience is going to change pretty dramatically in the next 10 to 20 years from AGI. Like how humans interact with each other, what is important, what isn't, what is wealth, what isn't. if I only have 10 to 20 years before like all of this like drastically changes, then like I need to move now. And if I don't move now, I'm going to miss this like very, very important window. And this like actually informs a lot of just like how I live my life too. So I do like some crazy thing. Like I don't invest in like super safe. I don't invest super safely. I don't eat like incredibly healthy because I don't really care about my health like 10 to 20 years from now, because I think like AGI will probably solve that problem.
Wait, what about the wedding diet?
That's not the craziest answer I've heard. I have heard that some people think that us on this podcast say we'll live until we're, 150, 200 years old or something. The human life expectancy is.
I think we're going to be living infinitely. Like, I think we'll be able to choose when we die. Like that's what I believe. Like, I believe that with like a very strong conviction, actually. Like, I fully believe that AGI will solve most like biological problems. If anything, like my brain will be able to be like put onto a server somewhere and I could rehash like different bodies and things like that. Like this is something I have pretty high conviction in and like base my decisions off of that right now.
So to end the show, can you quickly touch on, one piece of advice you'd like to give your younger self?
Start learning how to code earlier, probably. Oh, and then also carve your own path. I think this was, so like start learning how to code earlier. And this is something that like any smart person can learn how to do. It's not hard to code. It's intimidating because it's a new thing, but like you can learn how to do it, especially with like new tools today, like ChatGPT. Like essentially like you don't even have to know like all of the deep internals of like assembly or bytecode or anything like that. The other thing is like carve your own path. When I was a kid, like 1 to 18 years old, I got good grades. I did everything my parents told me. I did everything the teachers told me. And it was all for the end goal, I guess, of like getting to Penn, because that's what my parents said would be good. I eventually did all the things I was supposed to do. And then when I applied to Penn, I got deferred, which then taught me one thing, which was that the path is bullshit and that like you can't actually believe what other people tell you. And the only thing that you can control is like yourself and your actions. So with that in mind, like I've been trying to carve my own path ever since. So like I was taken off the path and then like I'm veering off of it ever since. And ever since I started veering off my own path and trying to figure out what I want, who I am, where I want to be, like all of those different things, have I started to feel more self-actualized, more fulfilled, and I guess like with results probably more successful. So that's what I would say.
That's great. Take life by the horns, steer it your own way.
Exactly.
What a great note to end on. Thanks, Jack, so much for taking the time. We really enjoyed the conversation. It's definitely one that we'll both remember.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. Will, Laura, great to see you guys again.